Hi everyone.
Here at the MIC, we often have a need to spin up new data sources that support OData interfaces, certainly now with the introduction of SMP3, for a concept application or project that we're working on. And there are lots of ways to do this. Towards the end of 2013, Jeff rolled one by hand using the SAP HANA Enterprise Cloud. Gareth rolled one using Node.js and the Express.js library. Now, of course, we've got people like Olivier, Andrew, and others who are getting up to speed with River. But I wanted to show you a quick and easy way of doing the same thing in .NET. And personally, I think there are a lot of advantages to leveraging Microsoft's tools, which I think are superior in terms of their tooling and GUI, to quickly get things done. And I really do believe that Visual Studio suite of tools really continues to lead the way in terms of efficiency, expediency, rapid prototyping, and still giving you very wide flexibility to pretty much get anything done. In fact, some Node.js enthusiasts inside Microsoft loved Node so much that they recently created Node.js for Visual Studio with full IntelliSense support, profiling, debugging locally and remotely, so you can remotely debug a Node instance on a Mac or a Linux box through Visual Studio. So Redmond's still churning out some really cool stuff. In this example, I'm going to use Visual Studio.NET and SQL Server to run through a really simple example. The nice thing about .NET and Microsoft in general is that there's usually about 10 ways of doing the same thing. And this is something that I came across during the Costco POC, where we need to quickly stand up a set of OData entities that were CRUD enabled for Ivan here in Atlanta to test against. And so I'm going to create a database today in SQL Server, and then I'm going to expose it as an OData enabled web service with support for JSON formatting as well. So I'm going to start off here in SQL Server. I'm going to quickly define a database. The use case is going to be a simple project management database for the MIC team. So I'm going to create my database. And I'll create my members. That an auto-incrementing identity field. Just keep it pretty simple. I'm going to call this members, and I want you to take note of the fact that I'm calling it members with an S at the end, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Now I'll create my projects. I'll give it a duration. And I'll create a linking table. Probably don't have to do this, but I'll do it anyway. And finally, I will create all my foreign key relationships. On my projects, my members. This is just pretty basic stuff in SQL Server. And I've now created all my foreign key relationships. So now I'm going to hop off into Visual Studio, and I'm going to start off creating the web service. I'm going to create an ASP.NET web application, which gives me all of the scaffolding that I need to serve up HTTP requests using a local instance of IIS, and you would deploy this against IIS as well. IIS definitely is a little bit more complicated to set up than some other web servers, but I think that they've got a lot better over the last few years on that as well. So here I've got my project. I'm going to get rid of a couple of default pages that it creates, and so the first thing I'm going to do is create an ADO.NET entity data model. Now, what this is, the ADO.NET Entity Framework, it's a set of data access APIs for .NET, and it's actually pretty similar to the Java Persistence API. And what this framework does is it very quickly creates a set of classes or objects that are representations of some underlying data source, which in this case is going to be SQL Server, but in fact it could be any data source for which there's an ADO.NET data provider. So it could be an Oracle database, it could be a HANA database even as well if there was a corresponding driver for it in on Windows. But what's nice about it is that it abstracts the database to the developers, so you get to work with a set of entities programmatically instead of worrying about how the data is represented under the covers. So pretty basic stuff that I think most of you are pretty familiar with. But what you also get is with all of the tooling that you get with this ADO.NET Entity Data Model template is some really powerful querying capabilities that you can use to pass to your OData queries, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to create my entity model, and I'm going to generate from database, and I'm going to use the default name here. Now, the latest version of the Entity Framework has this really cool feature called pluralization. And you can see that it's checked here, pluralize or singularize generated object names. And this is really cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I want to create data models for these three tables. And if you remember back in SQL Server, I called my tables projects and members. So I go back to .NET and I go and create these classes using the wizard. And you see that it's called this entity member and this one project. So let's change it to the singular from the plural. That's pretty cool. So I can go in and I can browse all of these types and see how they're represented here. So it's kind of like a mini entity browser. But then in the code, I need to go and create now a service which will expose these entities through the default ASP.NET web engine, so that you can basically pass the queries directly from the browser, so all of your HTTP verbs directly back to these entities and get a result back through your web call, so that you can get your result back through your call to the web service. So to do that, I need to create a WCF data service. And here I define the entities that I want to expose. And you see it's got a bunch of default code here that I can just fill in. So I want to expose members and I want to expose projects. And also want to see any errors that might actually occur. And that's about it. I should be able to run my project. And there's my service document. So let's go to a REST client, and so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at my members, and I can do a get. I see I've got no data in there at the moment, so let's go and add some. I'm going to add Andrew here, and I'm going to go send. Now you'll see that I get a 403 forbidden, and the reason is, we go back to the code, the permissions that I set for these entities that get exposed through this particular class are set to read only. So I'm going to set them to all, read write. Let's try that again. And here we have success. And if I go back to SQL Server, just to verify that worked, there's the record that I just added. So that's pretty cool. So that's all working now, and I've got a full OData engine here. I can now query directly through HTTP. Now, what happens if I want to get this back as JSON? Well, the problem is that by default, I'm actually running Visual Studio 2010, and it actually by default does not have any concept of being able to serve up data by default through JSON. So what I can do is I've got a nice little class that I pulled off the web. And I can go and add an attribute. If we have a look at this class, we see that it'll handle actually all of the code that we need to format our responses back as JSON. Sets a content type, accept headers. Let's go and run this. And let's go back to our REST client. And see, I'm getting my response back as JSON. So that's it. A fairly quick run through of how to create an OData enabled web service in .NET. I hope this is useful, and we'll speak to you soon.